On Good afternoon and God bless you. Welcome to Morning Star Baptist Church in the Mattapan section of Boston. And as I'm opening, my name is John Borders. I'm the under shepherd of Morning Star Baptist Church, celebrating 40 years of ministry here. And don't be surprised if I do not ask you to say amen. Morning Star Baptist Church has endeavored to be a church of healing, social and spiritual engagement, and advocacy. We've encouraged, and we do encourage, vaccination for the people in our community, and we also encourage strong and robust voter support. We'd like to first give thanks to Representative Russell Holmes, who lives around the corner from us, representing our district here, for bringing us together today. Clap your hands for him, please. We would like to thank Tanisha Sullivan, Esquire, the president of the Boston chapter of the NAACP, for being our moderator today, along with Dr. Carolyn Crockett, who will be assisting her. And we'd like to thank the Morning Star Baptist Church and all the community leaders and various organizations that are gathered here, as well as those who work with and are viewing this through WCVB Channel 5. I thought it was important that standing here, President Tanisha Sullivan will stand here between our mayoral candidates. She will stand here in the middle because this forum is putting the NAACP agenda in the center of today's discussion. This is about the agenda for people of color, about the urban agenda, the agenda for the disproportionately poor and unemployed, and those who are suffering from the results of violence and discrimination in our areas, in our neighborhoods here in Boston. So we know the role that the NAACP has played over the years to fight for the advancement of people of color, and we also know the hard work that Tanisha Sullivan and her team have done over her lifetime. We'd like to thank the mayoral candidates who are here today because they are making history. We have Anissa Asabi George and Michelle Wu, who I know personally. God bless you. We welcome you here today. And we'd like to ask, please, there's enough filming going on. I'd like to ask that those of you who are here, please respect the actions of the moderator. Please follow the direction of the moderator. Questions have already been submitted and many vetted, and Representative Holmes will give you the process by which questions can and will be received. So there'll be no general discussion from the floor. This is a forum. We're here to listen to what people have to say, and we ask that you will limit any filming at this time because there's a lot of filming taking place, and pictures will be taken and submitted by the various mayoral campaigns. Would you join me now for a word of prayer? Dear Lord, we come before your presence on this historic election. In this historic election, for the first time in this city, we will have a woman leading the city of Boston. We gather in this holy sanctuary in search of truth, in search of justice and equity. We pray that our discussions will lead to better public safety, education, housing, business development, and racial reconciliation throughout the city of Boston. We thank you for the important role that the NAACP has played, and we ask your blessings upon Michelle Wu and Anissa Asabi George. We're not looking for political correctness today, O Lord. We're looking to hear their hearts. We're looking to hear their vision and what they're willing to sacrifice to lead the city of Boston. And we pray for peace and civility throughout our city. And we ask that this forum today will motivate people of color and people who live in the urban areas of Boston, from Mattapan to East Boston, that they will vote in this election in large numbers. This is my prayer to you in Jesus' name. Amen. Would you please receive Representative Russell Holmes, who is our host today, for further instructions.
Thank you, Bishop. As always, treats me as a son, and as always has welcomed me. And so thankful, Bishop, that it was just a quick call that you said immediately, yes, that you would receive us and have this forum on today. We're going to be streaming live. It's important just so everyone know, if you are telling folks, it's live on CVB Facebook page. So if you are tweeting or if you are letting folks know where to get the stream, it is the Facebook page at WCVB. So thank you, Councilor Saba George. Thank you, Councilor Wu, for your years of commitment to this city, to help build this city into the wonderful city it is today. We're so happy to have you here today. Thank you both, in particular from me, for your participation, your contributions, and certainly your attendance to our regular Boston Electoral Color meetings. And certainly my ask even here today is that whomever wins, that you continue this participation in our meetings as mayor. Immediately after the preliminary election, there was a call in this community about where do we go from here. There were many folks asking, what is the postmortem? Many folks saying why the black turnout did not turn out. We got this complaint particularly in wards 12, 14, and 18. These are precincts like where we're standing today in Ward 1414, my home precinct, where 80% of the folks in this precinct decided not to vote for either of these candidates. And you look at Ward 12, 14, 18, there are many precincts where that number, 7 or 8 out of 10, did not vote for my two friends. And so there was a call to action, and I immediately said, okay, I began, as I mentioned, as Bishop mentioned, by calling what I call the ministers along the Boston Black Belt. Pastor Hammond, who's here from Bethel. I called Pastor Hughes from from Concord. Pastor Sumner from Jubilee. Obviously Dickerson from Greater Love. Pastor Gruber from Charles Street. Pastor Walker from Roxbury Presbyterian. You get the drift. We started at Concord Baptist and went all the way to 12th Baptist right along the avenue. And what I kept hearing all along the way was that we need to do something. One, we need to make sure that the vote gets up, very much like what you've heard from Bishop Borders today, but also that we need to make sure our community is heard from. So we gathered here a month ago on 9/25. There were about 60 of us who gathered here to go through what were the priorities that we wanted to hear from the two candidates. And we came in, at least I did, with the theme that Congresswoman Presley talks about often, and that is the people closest to the pain should be closest to the power. And when we ended, that is Dr. Crockett leading the conversation in the breakouts, Attorney Sullivan leading the conversation during that day, with 6 areas that we thought were most important. Educational, when we think about the digital divide. Housing, when we think about gentrification. The economic development and opportunity section, when we think about the unemployment and the city contracts that we don't have here in the city. Public health with COVID and mass incasts. Public safety and that divide that's happening between Black Lives Matter and our police. We ended with also with budget. Where should we see our values, and they should come within our budget. And with that in mind, we came with some questions that Attorney Sullivan will go through today as a part of our process. But then we also thought in that day of our other great counselor, Counselor Mejia, and what she says. And so often we think about what she says, and that is nothing about us without us is for us. So nothing about us without us is for us. And so today, we want to ensure that these goals and what we call SMART goals are what we hear from today. We want to hear from you, and that are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound goals. That is the answer. We don't, quite frankly, as Bishop Borders talked about, we really don't want to see a debate. We want to hear your vision. We want to hear what it is you're going to do from this city in less than 2 weeks. And we want to have something in the end that is measurable, quantifiable, something in the end that we can have as a report card that you agreed to, that these were the things that you would change, and these are the measuring sticks that you will be held accountable to. We believe that this is obviously a reckoning of our city and a call that needs to be addressed, particularly around mass incasts and the like. So we don't want to just simply hear we differ on whether or not we should build a bridge or not. But if your vision is materialized, what does success look like to you? What does it look like to you? So then we could measure you 1 year from now, 100 days from now, and of course, 4 years from now. We had a report card generated, obviously, by the NAACP, the Walsh administration, and we certainly hope to do something similar as a group, because we have now organized, and we want to continue to do that. And so what we keep hearing is that we keep hearing about metrics and rubrics, and of course, Anissa with, Counselor Sava George with the teacher and a rubrics. In the end, that's what we want to create. We want to create a rubrics that we can then say to the mayor, either one of you, here's what you agreed to. So as we go through the rest of the day, here are the things that Bishop asked me to make sure we talked about, and that is any social media posts are done only by the 2 candidates team, no recording or streaming except for those who've been instructed. Please continue to follow the instructions of Attorney Sullivan and Dr. Crockett as we go through the process today. Please remove all paraphernalia when you leave the building today. And please, there will be a timekeeper, that would be me, and we're going to look to give each one of them a minute for each answer, but then obviously Attorney Sullivan and Dr. Crockett will manage it from there. So there are going to be only 2 times we're going to ask that you please clap. One will be when we bring the 2 candidates up, and the other will be at the end when we close. And so it's now my honor to bring up our attorney, our president of the Boston NAACP, Attorney Sullivan, who will lead us to the rest of the day, of the event.
Thank you, Rep. It is good to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I want to thank first Bishop Borders for opening Morning Star up for this opportunity, not only today, but for our convening a few weeks ago. This is the house in which I worship. And so it is always good to be here. And of course, I have to acknowledge First Lady Sandra Borders for her leadership as well. my soror. And in thanking Rep. Holmes, I also want to thank Cherie Holmes for her leadership. You know, I believe in the partnership there. So thank you both. I also want to quickly acknowledge Sheriff Steve Tompkins, who is here, member of the Electeds of Color group that Rep. Holmes referenced, and of course, former Senator Diane Wilkerson, who continues to be a stalwart leader in our community. We have a lot of terrain to cover today, and we are going to do it because this conversation is so critically important to the Black community. As Rep. Holmes mentioned, so many of us here in the city of Boston who had the opportunity to vote in September chose other candidates. And so we've got choices to make. And we want to make informed choices because truly the future of our city is at stake. I believe that this is one of the most consequential elections of our lifetime. And so with that, it is my pleasure to bring up our city councilors at large, Anissa Asabi George and Michelle Wu. So this is the start of our Souls to the Polls weekend here in Boston, and we are focused on the Black community. Here in the city of Boston, the Black community has historically fought for racial equity for all of us. And our advocacy as a community has led to the desegregation of Boston housing, Boston public schools, Boston police, Boston fire, those departments just to name a few. And when we have been successful in this fight for racial equity, all of Boston has benefited. However, across many quality of life indicators, the experiences of Black Boston continues to lag behind every other racial demographic group. Education, housing, wealth, health, and unfortunately, that list goes on and on. Throughout Boston's history, Black Bostonians have displayed resilience, and we have survived because of, and sometimes in spite of, the policies of those sitting in the mayor's seat. It is our hope that with this election, Black Boston will no longer continue to just survive, but that we will thrive. And that depends in part on what one of the two of you will do for us moving forward. So today we seek to answer a couple of questions. One, as Boston continues to make strides towards greater equity and opportunity, what will your administration do to help ensure Black Bostonians are not left behind? Two, what will you do to improve the quality of life for Black Bostonians also? With that, I am going to open it up, giving you both 1 minute to provide us with an opening statement. Please keep those two questions in mind in your opening statement, and then we'll kick it off to some more directed questions. Can you, and you have, perfect. Or you can pull it, yep. Perfect. And I'm going to start, Councilor Asabi George, with you.
Is this on? Oh, it is. Out loud. I'm just grateful to be with all of you this afternoon in community, in partnership, in fellowship. Grateful for the opportunity, Bishop Borders, to be at Morning Star, a place that I'm grateful to call home away from home on occasion. My name's Anissa Asabi George, and I'm grateful to have spent the last 6 years serving as an at-large city councilor, and the 13 years before that in the classroom. When I think about the work that we have to do for the city going forward, in particular our Black community, it is about all of the things that the city does. We need to reopen the doors that have been slammed shut for too many years in too many spaces on the Black community. It is certainly about education. It is certainly about housing. It is certainly about public safety and public health. It's absolutely about basic city services and simply improving the quality of life, an opportunity to earn an income, build a family, and set down roots. I'm committed to doing that work and look forward to doing that work in partnership with all of you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very honored to be here. Thank you, Bishop and Lady Boarders, for hosting us, and to everyone who spent so much time creating this space. We are truly at a crossroads in Boston, and I am humbled to have the chance to stand on this stage as one of the 2 finalists to serve this city. I'm someone who never expected to be in government. Growing up as a daughter of immigrants, learned from a young age that the barriers that were invisible sit heavily on the shoulders of those who are otherized in this country. When my mom experienced a mental health crisis, that transformed the trajectory of my family, and in becoming her caregiver, in raising my sisters in this city, we have lived a bit of the gaps and the disparities in Boston, and I bring that urgency with me every day in fighting to make sure that we are closing those gaps. Today we're talking about the brilliance, the resiliency, the talent of the Black community, but also the disparate impact that policies have had and the outcomes that we continue to see today. And so I'm making sure that we are going to move past the status quo, have everyone at the table, and dig in to make sure that we are changing these systems.
Thank you. We're going to start with economic opportunity, economic development, and jobs. We have a prosperous city, but we want to increase that prosperity. We want a city where we can all live in a healthy environment, work to earn a family-sustaining income, and thrive to enjoy the fruit of our labor. With 18.9% of Bostonians living at or below the poverty line, and 27.7% of our children living at or below the poverty line. That is not yet a reality for all Bostonians. I'm going to begin with Councilor Wu. Given that the vast majority of Bostonians either have a job or they're looking for a job, what will your administration do to help ensure that Boston residents have access to meaningful, family-sustaining job opportunities right here in Boston?
We're in a turning point for our economy, as well as this new era of some remote work, some hybrid, means that we are all rethinking across the country what the point of cities are, what draws people in, where the jobs are. In Boston, where the 3rd largest sector is service jobs, when our downtown office buildings are empty, when there are vacancies throughout our business districts, that ripples and ripples and ripples. The clear low-hanging fruit is to make sure that every dollar that we're spending from city contracting is directly going to close the racial wealth gap. I've been proud to lead on this in partnership with then Councilor Ayanna Pressley, passing legislation for accountability and working in partnership with Beckma and so many community leaders who are here today. We need to have a clear purchasing plan for the city of Boston so that we will centralize and have accountability for how our dollars are spent, lifting and investing into Black-owned businesses, and push other sectors, hospitals, universities, to do the same alongside us. We need to fill these vacancies with Black entrepreneurs, not just in Dorchester, Mattapan, Roxbury, but on Newberry Street, in the Seaport. There's so much that the attitude and philosophy of the mayor's office, partnered with legislation and investment into community, can make a difference. We only get a minute for each of these questions.
You'll have more time. You'll have more time. But I am going to loop back around, but I want to give Councilor Asabi George an opportunity to respond. Again, the question, what will your administration do to help ensure that Boston residents have access to meaningful family-sustaining job opportunities in Boston?
Thank you, Tanisha, for the question, and I appreciate that it's been framed in the family-sustaining way. And certainly, no matter how that family is made up, what it looks like, we as a city have an obligation to make sure that we are able to sustain our families here in Boston. And that is certainly about investment, investing in our people, investing in workforce opportunities, investing in the small businesses that exist in this city, investing in those opportunities for small businesses to invest into the extended community. We've got to create those opportunities. I am committed to it. I have rolled out a $100 million investment in our Black community specifically to respond to those needs. We also have to create parity in the workforce among pay, especially as it relates to our city's workforce. As mayor, with a workforce of 18,000 people, we need to make sure that those individuals reflect the diversity of this city and reflect the pay needed to invest in and live in this city, build family, build home, build children, and build community.
Thank you. Councillor Wu. Now we're going to focus specifically on closing the racial wealth gap. Based on the structure of our country, one of the most reliable ways to create wealth is through land and home ownership. So in this section, we're going to focus on housing. We believe that housing is an anchor to address the social determinants of health and to generate wealth to sustain the Black community. The recent census suggests that Black people are leaving this city. Anecdotally, we've seen many Black folks move to Randolph, Brockton, and Stoughton in recent years in search of affordable home ownership and rental opportunities. What will your administration do to increase Black home ownership in Boston? And do you have a target number of new Black homeowners you would like to reach?
So this is very much tied to the last question as well, and I've been blessed to have the guidance and insights from so many in our community, and Senator Wilkerson and I were just talking about investing in people rather than buildings as a framework, right? We can set high goals for housing as we had under the last administration, and yet see that at the end of the day, we can't just keep people spinning their wheels once you find a place hoping that the landlord won't raise the rent until we have family sustaining wages, opportunities. The housing has to match that as well. So on housing in particular, I'm going to put $200 million of our federal relief funds into building more affordability, but also boosting homeownership. Evanston, Illinois has put out a model of really tying the idea that systemically the Black community has been deprived of opportunity to build generational wealth decade after decade after decade, and it's time with our down payment assistance and homeownership programs to help close those gaps. We'll make sure that as we're talking about new buildings in Boston, it's also not just who's moving in and helping home buyers, but who is building those buildings as well, again, tying back to growing and creating wealth in Boston.
So that was, just want to confirm, that was a $200 million investment from ARPA funds and other funds that will be coming into the city to support home ownership.
Housing stability and home ownership.
Thank you. Councillor Sabi George.
You know, continuing on the conversation around housing, which we've heard neighborhood after neighborhood, resident after resident, how important housing and the cost of housing is here in the city of Boston. And certainly I'm committed to, and both of us are committed to, creating more affordability and deeper affordability across our city in every one of our neighborhoods. And I know that our Black community has been hit especially hard by the cost of housing, and we work every day to stop displacement and gentrification, and we do that through being very intentional in our investments around home ownership. I have a particular focus on down payment assistance, a city fund within my first 100 days that will invest $1 million in down payment assistance, but we have to go further to that. Michelle and I both committed to that $200 million investment in housing creation across our city, and we need to still do more than that. It's about first-time home buyer programs in our city. It also has to be, and I have a particular attention paid to, first in your family home ownership. We know families, in particular Black families in this city, who have been here for generations and have never owned a home, the soil, or the land in which they exist. First-generation home buying is a critical component of my housing plan.
Thank you. I want to stay there for a moment. Again, the commitment on the $200 million investment. What specifically would you do to help support renters who are certainly suffering, many of whom are suffering significantly during the COVID-19 pandemic?
That's a great follow-up question, and I want to also be mindful that neither one of us answered that target number question. I think that's an important one to get to. I don't actually have a target number. I think that's a call to action that I'm going to receive today, and coming back with a target number both on home ownership, first in your family, home ownership, first time, and just first-time home or home ownership rates across the city. I think that's an important charge to accept from today's forum. When we think about that $200 million investment in particular, it's about creating a larger volume of housing opportunities across our city. It's also about making sure that we have diversity in the housing that's available for single families, for single-person households, for families just starting out, and for growing families, and for our seniors. We cannot forget our aging and older Bostonians who want to continue calling Boston their home, both on the rental side and on the ownership side. Both of those opportunities need to be made available. I think it's also important for us to continue to invest in our Office of Housing Stability, which has supported families during transition, families experiencing homelessness, families on the brink of losing their household. We've got to invest in that office in a much more critical way.
Thank you, Councilor Sabi. George, Councilor Wu, would you like to follow up on that?
2/3 of Boston residents are renters, right? So if you don't have a plan for renters, we're really not talking about housing and housing stability at all in Boston. And out of our renters, nearly 1/3 of folks who are renting their homes pay more than 50% of their income every year, right? Unsustainable, impossible choices that our families are being put under. And so, especially now after the pandemic, we have seen Black families crushed by the burden of debt, growing and growing, and the evictions moratorium has not necessarily, we've delayed and staved off a little bit of the immediate harm, but we need to get in there and make sure that our rental assistance programs are directly connecting to renters so that we are paying off those debts and removing the threat of eviction overall. We are still not reaching particularly Black and brown families in that. So I want to make sure that we're committing to work in partnership with faith-based organizations, community-based organizations, so that our rental programs to help the city negotiate directly with landlords, to help directly subsidize rent arrearages, that we are lifting the evictions threat from those who are still facing that in Boston. The funds are here to do that. And I do want to mention my support for and advocacy for rent stabilization, a key policy in conjunction with all of our efforts to make sure that we are building more homes, simplifying our processes, moving affordable housing more quickly. We need to fight to have the tools so that our renters can fight off displacement and have emergency relief and keep rents at a reasonable rate.
Thank you. Councilor Sabi George, I'm going to start with you for economic development. The February 2021 Supplier Diversity Executive Order signed by Mayor Walsh set a 25% procurement goal for women and so-called minority-owned businesses. Specifically, 15% for women-owned and a total of 10% for minority-owned business procurement. These goals were set in response to a disparity study commissioned by the city. And just in simple terms, because we've got folks watching us on Facebook, and we want to make sure that everybody understands this talk about disparity studies and procurement and all that good stuff. In simple terms, for city contracts, one of the things the disparity study did was to measure the difference between the availability of the people, the companies to do the work, and the contracts that those companies received. So on a 100-point scale, the disparity study indicated that for AAPI-owned businesses, the index is 141, so that's over the 100-point mark. For Indigenous-owned businesses, it's 100, so it's hitting the mark. For white women-owned businesses, it's 76, just below the mark. For Latinx-owned businesses, it's 70, below the mark. And for Black-owned businesses, the index is 12. So, Councilor Sabi George, what will your administration do to close the deep disparity gap for Black-owned businesses to ensure that they get their fair share of city contracts?
Well, thank you for the question, and I appreciate that you've spelled it out clearly. Many of us that are involved in this work didn't need another study to show us what's going on. And we talk about a gap. A gap generally would describe that there is some sort of connection. But when we talk about numbers like 12%, that's not a gap. That is a total separation from opportunity, from dollars, from community being able to build. And we have to change that conversation very specifically and directly. We need to utilize where we can the power of executive order and the authority of the mayor alone. And there are some small pieces that we can do. Unfortunately, they are just simply small pieces. We need to change the way that we operate. We need to change the RFP process. We need to break it down so that small businesses owned by Black people can apply for them, can register for them, can collect a check from them. Access to wealth, starts with access to capital, technical assistance, resources, knowledge, and relationship. We have to open up the doors to City Hall for these opportunities.
Thank you. Councillor Wu.
What we found fighting on this issue for 6+ years now in partnership with community is that the immediate steps are clear. And for 17 years, since the original Supplier Diversity Office was dismantled under threat of legal action, we lost Black-owned businesses that would have pushed that number even higher for availability. And so we are now not only far below the mark of where things stand in a snapshot that the disparity study captured, but we are decades late in having missed out on the chance of businesses moving on, businesses not having received their fair share and being able to grow and build wealth in communities for a long, long time. So immediate steps. Many of these are multi-year contracts, usually around 3 years long. The decision-making power has traditionally sat with department heads, not centrally. In that way, when a department head's working on so many things, the public works department head is worrying about trash pickup. They're not thinking ahead to how we ensure that the next time this contract comes up, we have a long list of bidders that include Black-owned, Brown-owned businesses from the community. This is immediate, urgent, every day. And so right within my first 100 days, I'll make sure we have a citywide purchasing plan for full transparency on what the upcoming contracts are, what the supply expectations are, what you will have to do to get ready to bid, and then make sure that we are putting the money aside to invest in the businesses already in Boston to help apply for these.
That's time.
Okay, and also build pipelines to make up these gaps.
Thank you.
Tanisha, can I just insert?
Yes.
I think we need to talk a little bit more about this. And
Okay.
I think that
Sure.
Michelle would agree, because this is such an important topic when we help our communities of color and our Black communities in particular build wealth. Business needs the city's support in order to build wealth, whether you're doing business with the city directly, or you can time us again. We can maybe do 1 minute at a time each again, or doing business with the city directly or doing business in community. Through our office, my administration's Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Justice, we will be focused on that, and I will have an office in place through my cabinet that will be empowered to oversee this work. We will also have within each of our cabinet in our cabinet departments, an Office of Equity that will also oversee this. It is important to me in my administration that I not just have a chief of equity, to say that I have a chief of equity, but that I have a chief of equity that's empowered, but that also within housing or public health, there is also an equity lens that looks at the work every single day.
Councillor Wu.
Grateful for the extra time. I'll just say that, there's a lot we need to do inside City Hall, and there's a lot of people in this room who know exactly what we need to do and who have been trying to get us to do that. Most, I think, of this is a philosophy that we need to get City Hall out of City Hall into community, right? There are thousands of jobs available at any given moment with the city, for example, not even talking contracts, jobs that someone could step into right now, today. And yet, by the time you can go on the website and apply, they've already been basically given to someone, right? So that's not the way to have transparency, just to say, come and apply by the time that we get this posting up there. We need to be having regular job fairs in partnership with community, empower our newly established Commission on Black Men and Boys to be, okay, sorry, I'm seeing this
Time.
to have the funds to build the community side engagement.
Thank you both. Next Tuesday, City Councilors Julia Mejia and Kenzie Bach will host a historic hearing on reparations. This hearing will talk about the history and experience of Black people in this city, our pain, our joy, our struggle, and our achievement. It will explore education, the arts, housing, land, and economic opportunity. There can be no question that our city has moved forward. The question is who has been left behind and why. Reparations is about healing, justice, and repair. Councilor Asabi George, will you support establishing a commission on reparations to advance healing, justice, and repair in Boston?
Simply the answer is yes, and
Thank
I've
you.
got a minute to go on. Well, he said it.
Nope, I'm going to do a yes/no.
All
That's
right.
good. Councilor Wu, will you
Yes.
support a step? Thank you. Let me finish this. The lawyer in me. Let me finish the question. Will you support establishing a commission on reparations to advance healing, justice, and repair in Boston?
Yes.
Thank you. We're running out of time, so. In 2020, Councilor Asabi George, coming to you, Councilor Ricardo Arroyo advanced the idea of racism as a public health crisis here in the city of Boston. Following the murder of George Floyd, Mayor Walsh made the declaration by executive order. The primary focus of the executive order was on public safety and led to the creation of the Police Reform Task Force. In full disclosure, as you both know, I served on the task force with community members Attorney Allison Cartwright, Jamal Crawford, and Attorney Joe Feaster, along with many others, but our small group served as the subcommittee that designed the Office of Policing Accountability and Transparency, known as OPAT, one of the central recommendations of that task force. Councilor Asabi George, yes, no. Will you confirm your commitment to implementing the all elements of the Police Reform Task Force report?
Yes, starting on day one.
Councilor Wu,
Yes.
thank you. Time?
Day one, yes.
Thank you. Councilor Wu, specifically, will you commit to making the necessary investments to ensure we have a robust diversity, equity, and inclusion unit within the Boston Police Department, as well as a productive and accessible Office of Policing Accountability and Transparency outside of the Boston Police Department?
Yes, ma'am.
Councilor Asabi George, same question.
Do you want to restate the question?
Yes,
Attorney
I'm going
Sullivan?
to. I will do that for you. Will you commit to making the necessary investments to ensure we have a robust diversity, equity, and inclusion unit within the Boston Police Department, as well as a productive and accessible Office of Policing and Accountability outside of the BPD?
Yes.
Thank you. Councilor Asabi George, we will have a new police commissioner and command staff. What will you do to ensure we have a diverse command staff within the Boston Police Department?
That's a great question. Starting day one of my administration, we will kick off a community process to hire our next police commissioner. And I want to also say, as I build my own cabinet, which will be diverse and reflective of this city, racially, ethnically, linguistically, we need to make sure that both leadership teams, my cabinet and the leadership of the Boston Police Department, is one that is empowered to lead in the areas of expertise. That is incredibly important to me, to not just have the photo op, whether it's my cabinet or leadership at BPD, that those that are in leadership positions are empowered to do the work in which they are committed to serve.
Councilor Wu, we will have a new police commissioner and command staff. What will you do to ensure we have a diverse command staff within the BPD?
It is unacceptable where things are right now. Not a single Black leader in these positions of leadership across that top level. And this is a function of both the recruitment practices, but also the promotional practices and discipline that is unevenly and in some ways arbitrarily handed out. And so in choosing the next police commissioner, we will not only have transparency and make sure that we're making a choice that reflects the trust of communities. But this leader must be empowered right away to renegotiate the police union contract to address many of these disparities. So in line with the Police Reform Task Force's recommendation, allowing for promotional decisions to be made, taking into account more than just exam scores is a basic. Allowing for the promotion of deputy superintendents to be in top roles in each precinct is a basic. And also ensuring that we are taking a good look at how we can establish an objective disciplinary matrix so that there will be no instances of major disparities in discipline when it comes to racial bias, favoritism, and all of that.
Thank you. We do believe there is a link between public safety and public health. It's one of the things that we discussed during our convening about a month ago. But we know that public health is so much more than just public safety. Designing and implementing public policy through the lens of public health, we believe, helps to ensure that we're tackling root causes and addressing the social determinants of health writ large, which include housing, education, economic opportunity, climate, violence, trauma, all which disproportionately impact the Black community here in Boston. Councillor Wu, how can the declaration of racism as a public health crisis in Boston be better leveraged to help improve the quality of life within the Black community?
This declaration came well into the pandemic when our colleagues on the council and our leader, Councillor Ricardo Arroyo, had already been calling for this well before. And so we saw with this in place during the pandemic that the city was able to do big things quickly. And many of the things that we accomplished, whether it was food distribution or Chromebooks to every single student, were all issues that community members had been advocating for years before this virus, but were told would be impossible. And so continuing the urgency and ensuring that the original intent of this declaration of racism as a public health crisis was to establish a lens through which every decision that the city makes would flow. Budgetary decisions, programmatic decisions, legislation, every way that city government functions should be looked at as to whether we are closing gaps or actually exacerbating disparities based on doing things the way that they have been done. I proposed a justice audit to make sure that the entire city and our partner organizations are on the same page in how city government should be functioning to close gaps.
Thank you. Councillor Sabi George, do you want me to read? How can the declaration of racism as a public health crisis in Boston be better leveraged to help improve the quality of life writ large within the Black community?
Well, I think it first needs to be leveraged among all of our systems across our city, what we control, our school system, our policing system, our housing system, our transportation system, even our parks and environment system. When we think about environmental injustices, that is rooted in racism. When we think about displacement and gentrification, it is rooted in racism. When we think about low achievement, in too many of our schools, almost all of our schools, have desperately low levels of underachievement for our kids. That is rooted in racism. Our special education services, especially our sub-separate special ed classrooms, disproportionately impact Black and brown boys. We've got to leverage our power as a city to dismantle this across all of those systems, including how we decide to fill potholes, repair sidewalks, and build playgrounds. As mayor of this city, utilizing my authority and my power in partnership with community, we will work to dismantle it in each and every one of those spaces. Not starting with one particular place, starting with it all. It has to be a more comprehensive effort if we truly are going to embrace that racism is a public health crisis in this city.
Thank you. Councillor Sabi George, one of the priorities that came out of our convening was the establishment of a health equity dashboard for the city of Boston. Will you commit to establishing a health equity dashboard for our city?
Yes, we need a health equity dashboard. Is that yes or no? I can go on. We also need to make sure that we are measuring the work that we are doing so that we can see the places that we're missing. It certainly goes back to the economic development question, our contracts, our investments, our housing numbers, our academic achievement numbers, what's happening with children in kindergarten, in 4th grade, in 8th grade, in 9th grade, and graduation rates. We've got to be looking at these measures. We've got to be calculating the data so that we can serve the people of Boston. If we don't measure it, we don't act on it. Across all systems, we've got to do that.
Thank you. Councillor Wu.
Yes, absolutely. We need to ensure that we're following the data and the urgency that that data always speaks to, especially continuing from our recovery with this pandemic. I'm looking forward to elevating the voice and the leadership of the Boston Public Health Commission in having a direct medical-facing leader in ensuring that we are coordinating with all of the resources across Boston. It's not enough just to say we're going to strengthen the Boston Public Health Commission and measure the ways in which we are seeing the numbers play out. Our large institutions, our anchor institutions, major hospitals, life sciences organizations, these companies should all be expected to be plugging right in with us and aligning not just how we are collecting data, but how we're spending our money, how we are hiring. It is all intersectional, and I look forward to making sure that partnership encompasses all of that.
Thank you. Now turning to Mass and Cass, it has certainly become one of the top issues in this campaign cycle, and rightfully so. We have to give credit to many of the grassroots advocates, Domingo DeRosa and Yahaira Lopez, who really amplified and lifted this issue that now has captivated the attention of our Commonwealth as a whole. But what we know is that Mass and Cass is not the only area of our city that is experiencing humanitarian, health, and a safety crisis. In speaking with one of our Boston Public Schools teachers this week, she was lamenting about early mornings when children and teachers are going into school buildings right along our Blue Hill Ave corridor and having to walk through drug transactions and sex working, similar to what folks are experiencing at Mass and Cass. So what will your administration do, I'm going to start, Councilor Wu, with you, to not only address the crisis at Mass and Cass, but the ongoing crisis that runs through many of our communities, including the Blue Hill Avenue corridor?
Our plan to address the citywide crises of substance use, homelessness, and mental health ensures that we are taking a lens that it's not just about one intersection, one part of the city where you can try to sweep things away, because we know that those types of actions about a year ago, or a little over a year ago, had a harmful effect in destabilizing treatment, in ensuring that neighborhoods now all across the city were grappling with the same need for services. Right away, I'm going to appoint a cabinet-level chief to report directly to the mayor, whose job will be to ensure that we are acting with the same crisis-level data collection, monitoring, and regional collaboration that we saw was possible during the pandemic. This chief will build on the actions that Mayor Janey has now taken in an incredible step of leadership to ensure that we have a centrally collaborative regional leadership structure, and to be replacing the need on the ground with supportive housing that we are making available. We have city-owned buildings and properties. We have the resources, but we need to make sure we are getting in right away before it gets cold this fall so that people are not on the streets.
Thank you. Councilor Selby George.
Thank you for the question. And the crisis that is at Mass and Cass is, as you say, playing out in every part of our city. From Mass and Cass, we see it at Nubian Square, at Mattapan Square, Downtown Crossing, Copley, the North End, Andrew Square, Edward Everett Square, Upham's Corner. It is in every part of our city, right? Grove Hall, not where I came from, just before here. We see it playing out in our streets, and the devastation and the humanitarian crisis in which we are experiencing. As a member of the City Council, long before it became sexy, long before it was on the front page of the newspaper every other week, I've been invested in and doing this work to helping our most vulnerable city residents who are experiencing homelessness, who are struggling with mental illness, who are dealing with addiction and the changing addiction that we are seeing on our streets, and the implication it has for our city's residents, for our small business owners, for our kids coming and going to school. We've got a tremendous amount of work left to do across the city, decentralizing services, investing in long-term recovery, rebuilding the Long Island Bridge, doing the work in partnership with outreach workers who are invested in this day in and day out, and using $30 million from our opera funding to make it happen.
I'm actually going to stay with you, Councilor Asabi George. What will you do to ensure that the Black community, which the data indicates has been disproportionately impacted by the COVID-19 crisis, receives its fair share of the resources that are pouring into this city so that the Black community is not left behind during the recovery?
Yeah, we've unfortunately seen, as it relates to COVID specifically, a disproportionate number of members of the Black community who have not received vaccination. We need to continue to work with our Black COVID Coalition to make sure that they have the resources they need to make sure that the vaccine is available to the Black community. We also need to work with our small business owners to make sure that they are kept whole as much as possible, because the damage has been done over the last 20 months, to make sure that they have access to the resources to be whole and to build further. Entrepreneurs, small business owners across our city can take advantage of this crisis for the opportunity it may present ourselves. Entrepreneurs are looking for that. Entrepreneurs are creative, are innovative, and seek those opportunities. We as a city need to make sure that our Black entrepreneurs have access to the capital and the resources to do that. And those that have shuttered, making sure that we are wrapping around them with the support services they need in order to thrive in the future.
Thank you. Councilor Wu.
We need to bring a racial equity lens into everything that the city is doing. As mentioned before, there are many places in silos within the city government that we're already deploying racial equity tools and analysis, for example, in Boston Public Schools, expanding that so that this will be one of the most consequential inflows of funding and investment that we see in our lifetime right now. And so we have to get this right and have that be the leading lens with which we're looking at this. But number two is to have intentionality in building out our programs, to have funds dedicated to Black-owned businesses, to have funds dedicated to boosting Black home ownership. And then number three, to actually have impact on the ground is community leading the way. There could be no, we would not be where we are today in terms of where we've gotten in terms of closing gaps without the Black Boston COVID-19 Coalition, right? A community-based coalition that formed in response to the lack of the first two buckets that we saw. And so that is the model that we need to hold up as we are thinking about these funds and ensuring that the decision-making is being driven by community.
Thank you. Councilor Wu, I'm going to stay with you, wrapping up this particular section. What innovation or breakthrough ideas do you have about reconstruction in this city as an idea, ideologically, to help us emerge from the pandemic a stronger city? And you've got 1 minute.
Okay. Okay, I'll try to do some nitty-gritty and then some big. The moment we have now is to recognize that the crises we face are an opportunity to change the systems that were broken before this pandemic. The work that we have to do to meet our climate crisis alone, right? 86,000 buildings in Boston that have to be retrofitted. That is enough labor and jobs that can't be outsourced, that are good local jobs, that we cannot let this opportunity pass by to have equity in closing the racial wealth gap through this work that needs to be done. For housing, the funds that are flowing in, the decisions we're making about planning and development. And so there are two ideas I'll lift up. One is an urban conservation core. All the infrastructure needs we have, schools, housing, climate, these jobs should be available and connected to our young people through Madison Park, through returning citizens, to community members who are unemployed. Philadelphia has an amazing model of how they do it. We've already started having those conversations. And number two, I would like to appoint a chief possibility officer for the city to ensure we're not just thinking about the ways that things have been done, but really pushing us to transform our systems.
Thank you. Councilor Asabi George.
Thank you, Tanisha, for that question. And I know that we've got like another 20 minutes to go or so. It sounds like a wrap-up question. But when I think specifically about the Black community here in the city of Boston, they need to lead. You need to lead the way in our reconstruction. When we think about the future of this city, certainly reflecting on our city's past and on our history, we often talk simply about Boston's history. We need to talk about Boston's future. And through my administration, we will create an Office of Black Bostonians to lead the way, creating a space, creating funding, creating an action plan in partnership to make sure that our city's Black community not just has a seat at the table, but has an opportunity to collect a check, build a career, create a family, set down roots, and be a true part of Boston's future. That work is critical, I know, to the Black community, and it has to cross all sectors in which the city is involved, from education to housing to transportation to climate action and more. I'm watching the time.
That's good. Thank you. I appreciate that. So my partner, Dr. Crockett, is going to get in position. We have one final section in this portion. We are going to focus on education. And then we will transition to a few questions from those who are with us, that were pre-submitted by those who are with us today, and also some folks who are not able to be with us today. But education. We cannot have a forum focused on the Black community and not talk education. The reality is, for many of us, we're disappointed that education has not risen higher in the conversation during this campaign cycle. We know that on March 13th, 2 days, actually the last day before public school buildings closed here in Boston because of the pandemic, DESE announced an MOU with the Boston Public Schools in response to what have been described as chronically failing, chronically underperforming schools in our city, most of them primarily within the Black community, serving Black and brown children. During the campaign, we have heard from both of you plans relative to Madison Park, and we've also heard from both of you weighing in on the exam school debate. But the vast majority of kids in BPS are not at Madison or in an exam school. Counselor Wu, how will your administration work with the BPS to make the necessary changes to ensure that all of our children are receiving a high-quality education in the Boston Public Schools?
I'm so excited about this one. As a mom with 2 kids in BPS, having raised my sister as her legal guardian through BPS, it's been a long time that I have been, I'm trying to think of the polite word, angry about the disparities that we see, the lack of engagement that is possible with community members and families as well. I'm going to make sure that we take a whole child, whole community approach to our Boston Public Schools. The hub schools model of community schools that should be a platform for all of the needs that our families have, that needs to be expanded across every part of our district. The other big focus I want to bring is school to career pipelines. I've visited every single one of our Boston public high schools, seen and sat with school leaders and teachers and students in these buildings. You can feel the disparities as soon as you set foot right inside the door of where a school is along our spectrum of where the resources are concentrated. And so I'll make sure that we are closing the gap for early ed, investing in our facilities for healthy and inspiring places to learn, and taking this whole child, whole community approach.
George.
No, thank you for the question, and certainly schools and education is a central focus of my work. It has been both personally and professionally. As a graduate of the Boston Public Schools, I'm a graduate of Boston Tech, now the O'Brien. I am the proud parent of 4 BPS students, a former classroom teacher. I spent 13 years in the classroom at East Boston High School and chair the Council's Committee on Education. We've got to do a number of things to see some changes quickly as it relates to the Boston Public Schools across the board. One, we have a $1.3 billion budget in which we're investing in our schools. We need to make sure that each and every one of those dollars is spent on student-facing services, that we are looking at grade reconfigurations. We've started that work. We've got more to do. High school redesign, of course, in addition to the work around Madison within my first 100 days, a strategic plan to make Madison a 16-hour-a-day campus with real partnerships, in addition to our exam schools, our high schools. Early literacy for our babies, when we teach kids literacy, when we engage them fully across all schools in an aligned curriculum, we teach our kids to engage in content for the rest of their lives. Special education services, especially sub-separate classrooms.
Thank you. So both of you have commented, not just here today, but in other forums about being moms and moms of school-age children. I'm just going to keep it real in the moment. One of the comments that I've heard repeatedly from folks in the Black community is that, you know, they don't have children who are experiencing the gaps. They're not moms who, you know, are from families that are experiencing many of the opportunity gaps that Black and brown children are experiencing in the Boston Public Schools. How do you respond to that?
Well, first, it's a
Counselor
short
Sanders.
answer. I'll start there since you stopped looking at me. That is a true statement. I have been able to, especially as a former educator, give my children the things that they need. And where they've missed things in the classroom, I've been able to add on to enhance their experiences. My children will be fine. When I think about my students that I taught over those 13 years at East Boston High School, many of them came to the classroom, and I taught mostly juniors and seniors, without that strong foundation, without the basics in place. And that there will forever stunt their opportunity. We've got to intercede at every grade level. We have to have a particular focus on our babies, on our kindergartners, our first, our second, third graders, because by the time they get to high school, it's not too late. We can put interventions in place. We can work with our young people for sure, but the achievement they can have with early opportunities is like none other. We've got to work with our families and engage our community-based organizations in this work. We've got to make sure that our educators have access to the professional development, and then our children, our kids, our collective children have access to those opportunities. That when we say kids have access to a high-quality school, that is irresponsible. Every child should be in a high-quality seat.
Thank you. Counselor Wu, same question. There is a reaction that I've received from folks in the Black community that your children are going to be fine. How do you respond to that?
I share our family experiences to give a little sense of the urgency that I feel for all of our kids. And that is when you get that email or note from the teacher on a very hot day to remember to pack extra water bottles, right? Because we don't have water fountains that we can draw on in school safely. That is watching my son in Zoom kindergarten and seeing in the days that he was able to make it on and stay on, half the class wasn't there, and half of those students who were there had internet connections where you could barely hear them talking, and you know they couldn't hear the teacher very well either. And so I've had a window through the places within BPS that we have been, and I've pushed to make sure that I'm not just thinking through the lens of my own kids and the spaces that they've been assigned to. That is why I went and visited every single Boston Public High School. That is why I go and sit with parents and guardians and stakeholder groups representing all of our school communities. It is important for us to move with urgency. I know when my child was born, that was the first year that a new mayor and new city council started. One mayoral term later, he was ready for school.
Time.
2 more terms, they're ready for high school. We cannot move at the pace of government. We got to move with our families.
Dr. Crockett is coming to the microphone. Last question, yes or no. Counselor Asabi George, will your administration work collaboratively with the City Council and residents to restore an elected school committee?
So I am a yes or no?
Yes.
Oh, that's an interesting one. No. If I'm going to be totally honest, I'd like to expand on that maybe in my closing.
Okay. Councilor Wu.
I've supported structural change
So
to
it's a
the
yes or
committee.
no?
Not fully elected, no.
No. So that's a no from both. Thank you. Dr. Crockett.
Thank you so much. Can you all hear me okay? Wonderful. So first, please, let's give a round of applause to the candidates and our moderator for bringing us to this point. I have very much appreciated the substance, the civility, and focus of the conversation to this point. And we have some more to discuss. Really want to be able to first acknowledge, again, Bishop and First Lady Borders for having us and creating this wonderful forum and this environment for us to have a conversation that is desperately needed as we make our way to November 2nd. Basically, today we have folks who are in the sanctuary with us, and we have folks who are streaming online, and we have people who have submitted some questions. And so for this segment of our program, what I will do is allow some people who have submitted their questions in advance to come and pose them to the candidates. And also there are people who have submitted some questions online as a part of their registration. And so this is just a town hall kind of aspect of the program where we will be able to hear from you, and the candidates will have an opportunity to hear from folks who have thought about this day and have very much been excited about being able to pose a question directly to you. So with that, again, really encouraging people to hold your applause, to maintain the civility of this convening, and to ask our first question bringer to come right to the mic, who's Marvin Vernay. Marvin, where are you? Great. And ask that you, Marvin, I know you will, ask a question. This is an opportunity for you to ask a question and not make a comment.
Absolutely.
And just to go ahead and direct it right to our guests.
Well, first of all, thank you all for coming to Morning Star again. Marvin Vernay, resident of Roxbury, member of this church here at Morning Star Baptist. The question I have is that we have seen and heard in the past that Boston previous mayors have said that they are committed to the racial reckoning, if you will. That they want to end and find out in ways of making sure that we are receiving adequate support on for black businesses. But I have a question, and this question is, how will you ensure that the actual City of Boston budget and purchasing is done in an equitable way to ensure that black businesses receive contract opportunities? And I'm not looking for the theoretical answer, I'm looking for the practical answer. Whomever would like to take it first.
I'll begin with Councilor Wu.
We need right away, first 100 days, a citywide purchasing plan that is clear, and then an investment in organizations like BECMA to make sure that we are reaching businesses and helping with remove barriers for the application process. We need to change the barriers in our application process, right? When we've had hearings on this in the past and been pushing, entrepreneurs tell us that it is harder right now to apply for a city contract than it is for the state, where you can upload your information one time and then every time with the state you just update the purchasing information and the pricing, versus here it's a 70-page document every single time. We need to ensure that with the vacancies that are here in Boston, we're proactive in identifying the spaces that are open and working with community organizations to get entrepreneurs ready to even subsidize the spaces. And I'll just add, because I'm a former restaurant owner myself, I have a particular fondness for food businesses. The liquor license issue is a major, major barrier that then has ripple effects. I would like to triple the number of black-owned restaurants with liquor licenses.
Thank you very much for that question. I think it's important to ask us for those specifics. And the larger answer you can find on my website, anisaforboston.com, that includes not just my equity, inclusion, and justice plan, but an economic development plan specific to it with some real benchmarks. We need to make sure that we are investing in the black community so that they have the opportunities to build business separate from the city and participate in business with the city. That's why I've committed $100 million specific to the Black community. Additionally, around economic opportunity for small business owners, a $50 million fund, above and beyond slightly different parameters around our communities of color. And through our Office of Black Bostonians, making sure that everything we do as a city has that lens, has that directive, and is managed. We can say it, we need to put people in power to manage it and make sure that it happens. It's a plan, it's dollars to back it up, and it's people with power to ensure that it happens across the spectrum.
Thank you.
Our next question is from Raquel Webster and then Brandon Tillman. I know you have a question. Can you come up here to the mic and make a little bit of a line here? So, Raquel.
Dr. Crockett, we are not able to hear you.
Oh, sorry, Raquel. She's right. You can come up. And then the next. Is that better?
Yep.
Perfect. Yes. Okay. So Raquel Webster is going to bring the question, then Brandon Tillman, you're right there. And then we're going to bring up Charles Cofield. Will you come up and question? So let's have a little bit of a line. Thanks so much for respecting the time. Let's come on and hear from Raquel. Great.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. My name is Raquel Webster. I'm a member of the Psi Omega chapter, which is the Boston graduate chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. We have our president, Kathy Lucas, here, along with other members. And my question is, how does your administration plan to build relationships with Black organizations in the city of Boston?
Councilor Sabi George.
Thank you, Raquel, for that question. And it starts with building a cabinet team and commissioners and department directors who are reflective of our city, racially diverse specifically, and that they come from the community, and that we as a city actively engage in the community-based organizations of all forms that are doing the very important work, representing and working in partnership with our city's residents. The City of Boston and my administration should never recreate a wheel that is working. We should be supporting it, we should be funding it, we should be, I'm going to use the analogy, pumping up the tires to make sure that you can do your work every single day. I look forward to working in partnership with your sorority, with the fraternities that exist in the city that are doing important work, speaking for, in particular, the Black community. No need to recreate the wheel. It's about investment and empowering, making sure that your seat at the table is a meaningful seat, and that your experiences can help lead and drive the agenda of my administration.
Councilor Wu.
I'm going to thank you for the question and also just appreciate all of our sororities and fraternities who have been organizing so much in the last year around candidate forums, around events, Franklin Park and the Pan-Hellenic gatherings that have been not just a chance to say hello to everyone, but to talk about the issues and engage in the ways that we can partner. My philosophy, I'm a busy mom, I have kids, they're running around. Unless something is on the calendar, it won't be a priority, right? So making sure that we have regular convenings where we are attacking issue by issue through the department head and cabinet level leaders in community, having advisory commissions that are bringing in organizations to be able to do the work, not just reacting when there's a major incident or situation that we want to address, but being on the same page and being in constant conversation. We as a city are blessed to have so many organizations and activists across Boston, but often when we're working in silos, we're missing out on the chance to be building together.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Brandon Tillman, representing Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, EGL chapter, as well as the Greater Boston National Pan-Hellenic Council. My question, in 2020, the rest of the nation finally heard the outcry of Black people, the cry that resounded since 1619 in this country. Finally, there is a naming and calling out of racism and discrimination. It took a public murder in Minnesota to get businesses, policies, and initiatives to be deliberate about layers of issues that affect Black people, brown people, and others. What is your true commitment to intentionally rooting out inequity and dismantling racism for an all-inclusive Boston?
Councilor Wu.
this is at the heart of the function of city government, is to ensure every policy area, every investment that we make needs to happen through a racial equity lens. We've seen, even through the pandemic and escalating through the pandemic, a rise in white supremacy means a rise in hate crimes and anti-black sentiments, a rise in anti-Asian sentiments, a rise in anti-Semitism. And so for us in this moment, it is about getting to the root causes and changing our systems that have allowed and perpetuated white supremacy to grow. And that is true of all of the ways in which our city's organizational structures happen. So whether it's through schools, through police, through our development process, through public housing, that lens of eradicating and eliminating systemic racism needs to lead our decision making.
Thank you, Councilor Sabi-George.
Brandon, appreciate the question. And, the cries around Black Lives Matter has been ongoing. And there has certainly been the hearing, but not the listening, and not the acting to the work that needs to be realized, especially here at the city level. When I think about Boston, when I think about the work that Boston as a city needs to do, both in municipal government, in the private sector, in the nonprofit sector, in community, the work that we need to do to dismantle the systems of racism that exist, the work has to be front and center. That's why I've committed to building an equity chief that is empowered. We often tokenize that position within the public sector, city government. We often tokenize that as well in the private sector and many other places. When we truly want to do the work to end racism, to dismantle it, and to make sure the systems, whether it's education, housing, public health, public safety, across the spectrum, if we truly want to make those changes real, we've got to empower those that are leading in that space. I am committed as mayor of this city to do that.
Thank you. Thank you. And as Mr. Cofield comes, I'm going to ask Rep. Holmes to start making his way to the side as well.
Hello, I'm Charles Cofield, 36-year member of the Carpenters Union here in Boston, North Atlantic States Regional Council of Carpenters. To Bishop Borders, Morning Star family, thank you. And to my pastor as well, who's here, Pastor Conley Hughes from Concord Baptist, and to the candidates. My question is about the Responsible Development Coalition that the Carpenters Union has established here in the city of Boston, and both of you have signed that pledge. I'd like to hear a little bit about how you will help us to implement this and make sure that we have responsible contractors on board doing the right thing all around the city with being inclusive, not only for the signatory contractors that we have now, but bringing more minority contractors into the fold, as well as the Boston Employment Commission needs help as well. As you know, the Boston Employment Commission oversees jobs over 50,000 square feet in the city of Boston, making sure Boston residents, minorities, and females have an opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Cofield. Councilor Sabi-George.
Thank you, Charlie, for that question and for pointing out the importance of responsible development. That is about smart growth. That's about making sure as Boston continues to grow, it is done thoughtfully and in partnership with community. It's also to ensure that as our city grows, that our communities of color, in particular our Black communities, have an opportunity to build wealth. We've talked this afternoon a lot about the wealth gap and wealth building. Employment, opportunity for higher wages is part of that. And our city's growth needs to include our communities of color, needs to include our city's residents, not just in the job site and in the construction trades and the building of those units, but in the workforce following the ribbon cutting. Those employment opportunities across the spectrum need to be part of it. Our city's residents, especially our communities of color, our developers of color, our builders of color, our architects of color, also need a hand, a role, and an opportunity to make money off of that as well.
Councilor Wu.
Thank you so much, Mr. Cofield. Look, I think we have to be honest that when we take just a pure build, build, build mentality in the city without intentionality, what we see is unsafe work sites where workers are putting their lives at risk and even losing their lives in the city. We see wage theft. We see homes being built that these workers won't be able to afford to live in. And so responsible development to me means bringing together all those pieces. I'll appoint a chief of worker empowerment to not only think about bargaining with city unions and city workers, but also pull together how do we invest in the care economy and child care workforce? How do we ensure green jobs are going to be labor jobs that reflect the diversity of our communities? How do we invest in Madison Park and really open that up directly in partnership with the trades? There's so much to do just on creating wages that will lift up our families. And then on the development side, how we plan, how we make decisions about where and in what ways our city grows, we need changes so that there's oversight and accountability and planning so that we are building projects that are affordable, climate resilient, and accessible.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And our final question from the audience is here. Beverly Williams representing our partnership organization with WGBIL.
Hello, Beverly Williams. I'm co-chair of the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization, and we represent 61 organizations. 30 of those organizations are in Boston Central. And I want to thank you first for committing for the ARPA fund money for affordable housing. But I would also like to hear a strong commitment from you for just not affordable housing, but livable housing. You will have constituents in the Mildred C. Healy Public Housing Project, which is mold infested, roach infested. People have quarantined in these conditions, and it will take $50 million more to address livable conditions in public housing at the Mildred C. Healy. Will you commit to that?
Councillor Wu.
Yes, I believe we've had this conversation at the forum too, so thank you so much for organizing. Looking forward to that forum. Housing is health, housing is safety, and so the condition of the housing is just as important as the affordability.
Thank you, Councillor Sabi George.
And yes, also committed to that during our forum. I think also as a city, we've got to step up and invest in our public housing in ways that the state and the federal government have walked away from that investment. When we think about our lowest income residents, when we think about those that are most vulnerable, most at risk, and almost also families of color, investment in public housing across the city, including the Mildred Haley, is critical to our city's future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
And one final question from me. So, as a person who has been able to listen to this conversation with much interest, the discussion of equity and how equity is the goal that has to be driven through all of the policies, all of the budgeting, all of the structure of the hall, we know this well. As the inaugural chief of equity for the city of Boston, it was essential to me to understand how that role could be operationalized. And I'm curious to hear from each of you a yes or no question. When you do appoint your chief of equity, will this person be a part of your weekly meetings with your chief of staff? The person who will also review your weekly reports. Will the structure represent a weekly meeting with your chief of staff, your chief of equity, and yourself to review all of the city's business? It's a yes or no question.
Councillor Sabi George.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
A simple question, but a critical one. Thank you very much for your focus and your conversation today. Thank you, everyone.
And thank you, Dr. Crockett. And to our community members who had the opportunity to share questions. We did not get to all of them. We'll make sure that you receive some that came through email. We are closing. Thank you both for your time. I am going to give each of you, it's going to be 1 minute, I'm going to give each of you 2 minutes. And the reason I'm going to give you 2 minutes to close is because on that elected school committee question, both of you want to say more. I hope both of you will say more. Because the vast majority of folks living in the city of Boston support an elected school committee. And so we need to hear from each of you a little bit more about your thoughts around an elected school committee. You've got 2 minutes. This is your close and to comment on an elected school committee. Councillor Wu, we'll start with you.
I want to thank Attorney Sullivan and all of the organizers and again our hosts for today. This is a necessary but just scratching the surface conversation on so many issues that need to be the focus and priority of the next administration. I am running to tackle the big challenges in Boston and to do so in partnership with community. On the elected school committee issue, I hear the frustration. I live the frustration also with the current system not reflecting engagement, transparency, and direct dialogue with our community members. I support a majority elected committee, retaining some appointments to ensure accountability for the mayor and to also ensure that we can have representation across race, geography, and expertise. The process, though, of getting there is one that isn't just a swipe of the pen by any single elected official. It is a conversation that will require changing the city's charter, the fundamental governing document, with multiple public hearings, opportunities for comment. And so I look forward to engaging in that process. There is already not only the ballot question on the ballot this November, but a home rule petition from several of our colleagues to advance that larger legislative conversation. So I want to thank everyone, and please, voter turnout is critical, not just for the right result for Boston on November 2nd, but to build the momentum that we need to deliver change in office. So thank you for your civic engagement, your leadership. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. And Councilor Asabi George.
Thank you, Tanisha, and it's great to be here with Michelle and all of you for this afternoon's forum and discussion. I want to share a few things that I've learned today, a few things that I want to share with you that I'm committed to, and then we'll talk about the school committee piece. First and foremost, I am committed to the work that we need to do, invest in and empower, especially those that we put in positions of power as it relates to the Black community, the Office of Black Bostonians that I've committed to, and the work around equity, inclusion, and justice. It is important that your mayor have a plan, have an action list, have a dollar amount to invest in that work if it's truly going to happen. I have done those things. And that work is a result of the work I've done in community, working with our Black community, working with our communities of color who have been set aside from the work of city government in particular. I appreciate the conversation around the wealth gap that continues. We've got to end that conversation, and we do that by doing this very hard work together as it results in, or relates to, the city's business. We need to make sure that we've got the dashboard so we know the data. We've got to make sure that we've got the investment so we can make the changes. We also have to spend some time forecasting, especially as it relates to investing in our small businesses. We need to also follow up on that target number, especially as it relates to housing in our city. You've asked for that commitment, and I will give it to you. We need to make sure that we're doing the education work, the housing work, the transit work, that we are a safe and just city. I'm committed to that as your mayor. As it relates to the school committee, I've done this work as a member of the city council, and I want to be consistent. I believe in an appointed body so that I'm held responsible for the success and failures of what we do for and with our children and their families. I want to do this work with all of you. I hope to have your vote. I hope to have your support. I hope to have your continued partnership for the city of Boston.
Thank you. Thank you both. Please join me in thanking both Councilor Wu and Councilor Asabi George. Let's take
we're going to just do a group picture. We're going to ask Dr. Crockett to join us. And then they wanted to have a group picture, and then I will come and close, and the bishop will come and have some final comments. If you can join us, Dr. Crockett, with the candidates. Thank you so much, Attorney Sullivan. And I, again, just want to just say, let's give them all a round of applause one more time. So there are some follow-throughs, and I appreciate Councilor Saba George just picking up on some of them, because there are some things that we're going to still ask. We began this conversation with the SMART model. So we want to make sure we follow up and make sure on all of these topics you are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. We want to know what will be accomplished in the next year, the next 100 days we've heard Council will talk about, but then also in the next 4 years. We firmly believe that you should be held accountable to what you say you can achieve. What is it that you believe success looks like? We've heard an awful lot of things today, and we thought they were great, but it is the things that get measured get done. And that is what we want. We want a measuring stick around what you agreed so that it's not subjective when we come to this report card, that it's actually a report card that you agreed to. And so we're going to definitely follow up with that. Just want to now just thank all of the many folks, beginning with WCBB, NAACP Boston, of course, and just a major thank you to Morningstar. I mean, I can't thank you enough, Bishop Borders, First Lady. I can't thank Ms. Carroll enough. Thank you so much, Ms. Carroll. You guys don't see her, but she is the person who, Ms. Carla, enough. I apologize, Ms. Carla, enough. Minister Michael, Minister Marvin, GBIO, Mass Vote, King Boston, BMA, Delta Sigma Theta, Boston Alumni, Alpha Kappa Alpha, Sigma Omega, Alpha Sigma, I'm going through them all, Alpha, because I think they all deserve it. I apologize for them being so fast. Alpha Sigma, Alpha Phi Alpha, the Epsilon Gamma Lambda Association. If I got that wrong, I apologize. I'm a Me Phi Me guy. I never went to any fraternity or sorority, so I apologize. It is not meant to be offensive. It really isn't. The Omega Psi Phi Eta Phi, I get that wrong again. The Greater Boston NPHC, the Black Boston Hospitality Coalition, BECMA, and One United Bank. Let's give them a round of applause, please. So we're not done. Today, as we talked about, is the beginning of a Souls to the Polls weekend. This was the kickoff of it this morning, and we're going to continue on tomorrow, and we certainly hope to have all of you online, and certainly all of you here to come and do something that we had not been doing well, and that is organizing around getting out the vote in the black community. We believe that the foundation is not just us pushing the community through candidates, but it's fundamentally what has happened historically within the black church. And so tomorrow at 2 o'clock at Charles Street AME, they will be hosting us as we begin the march over to the Thelma Burns building, but certainly all around the city. Wherever you see an opportunity, we certainly hope that folks will come out and join us and support us in that effort. Also, we have until November 2nd. We're just a couple of weeks away. And we as a group have sat in this room and said that we have a goal of lifting and challenging ourselves in the black community, 7 in particular wards and precincts, that we want to set a goal that we are a bar 10% higher than what the vote was in 2013. So what does that mean? That means we need you to volunteer. That means we need you to join in. We need you to support Mass Vote. We're still raising money for Mass Vote. So go to massvote.org. We need to get bodies on the ground to make sure that these wards and precincts, that we never have another conversation about why the black community did not show up. It is on us. It is our responsibility to do that. And so you'll see signs out today. Please, everyone, we're going to have the same theme that we've had the entire time, and that is just vote. Let us make sure that you, in your yard, in your friends' yards, everywhere, everyone knows that November 2nd is the day for us all to come out and vote. This is not just, we began, like I said, with just a simple conversation, but past of me calling Pastor Hughes, which really began much of this conversation. And now there are many, many congregations. You've seen us advertising the banner and the like. We want to show up strong, and because we don't want this to be something that we do as a one-time. We want this to be something that we in Boston have embraced and continue to do year after year after year, that Souls to the Polls just become part of the natural things that we do to help to kick off this voting session. Today is the first day that we can vote. And so we have heard from the candidates today. We hope that this is structured in a way that there were many people in this room that still were open-minded. That's what we were trying our best to do with this group, and we certainly hope that the two of them today have made that point clear. And so finally, I'm going to bring it back to the bishop, who is going to close us out. But thank you all for being here today. Thank you all of those who've been online, and we're going to have our last word from the bishop.
Thank you very much. Please, all our participants, would you once again give them a round of applause? We had camera support here and some representation from the Haitian community. We want you to continue to pray for the people of Haiti. They were here, so we want to acknowledge them. And I would like to quickly ask the pastors and religious leaders who are here to stand up, who are here right now. I know you'll not be able to see them online, but there are some here in the congregation. Would you please stand up that we might recognize all of you? To Michelle and Anissa, it's obvious to me, I won't speak for the clergy or anyone else who are here, but it's obvious to me that you have proven through your relationship, your work on the city council, and your campaigning for mayor, that either one of you would make a very effective mayor in the city of Boston. So we're all going to benefit from that. And I'm not going to ask this in terms of a question, but I would hope that the campaigns would not be so divisive that you can't communicate with each other as you did when you were serving together on the city council. We'll hope that you'll still have some relationship after the war is over, and you'll be able to engage with one another as well as benefit, whoever's mayor, benefit from the best ideas that that other candidate brought to the table. We hope you'll be able to do that. And lastly, we're in a church. We're in a sanctuary. We're, for the most part, in the black community, we are still people of faith. We still believe in God and the importance of the church. And for this community in particular, I'm tired of hearing sirens racing down the street. And if they're not sirens, they're gunshots that we hear in this area. I'm tired of people saying, oh, the people over there in Mattapan, or the people in Roxbury, or the people in Dorchester, as if that's another world. I'm tired of seeing projects like Bromley Heath and others where people have lived for generations now being slowly but surely moved out by attrition and different things, different economic opportunities that look good on paper, but the data belies the truth about the people who are living here and what's going on. We've got to, so my point is we're also asking you not to forget that that we're all made in the image of God, that God cares for us all, that person that you see standing on the corner asking for help is a human being. Whether they voted for you or not, they deserve your respect and they deserve your influence. And as a pastor of a church, we would all agree that we have more to do. And there are smaller churches, the churches that you mentioned, Representative Holmes, these pastors are very engaged and very active, but there are some who are not. But they're just as concerned and prayerful about the things that are happening in our neighborhoods, in our city, as those that have much more profile than others. So we don't want you to forget the role of compassion and empathy and love and care and equal humanity that we all have, because there's a spirit at work now in this world that's seeking to divide us by color and language and culture and class, and it's demonic. And we're asking that you are not a part of it, that you'll not be used by it. To all of you who are here today, please know from Morning Star Baptist Church how much we thank you. Keep fighting the good fight. Keep doing what you all do. Keep staying engaged and pray for us. God bless you and thank you. Thank you. And please be mindful of social distancing.